Hey y'all, what's up? I just want to give a shout out to Petty Tupac TV. Make sure you go smash, like, and don't forget to subscribe. For real, for real.
John Eric Armstrong was born on November 23rd, 1973 in New Bern, North Carolina. His father was abusive towards Armstrong and his mother and sexually abused Armstrong when he was a child. Do y'all see in these stories the common thing is sexual abuse, how that can turn you into a real deviant? But anyway, in 1978, Armstrong's younger brother, Michael, died at 2 months old from sudden infant death syndrome. Because of the grief caused by Michael's death, Armstrong attempted to end his own life. Shortly thereafter, his father left him and his mother. Armstrong did not receive treatment for his grief until 1989, a year after he was hospitalized for locking himself in the bathroom because a girl at school was pressuring him into sex with her. As you may know, John Armstrong is an American serial killer who was convicted of killing 5 female sex workers in Detroit, Michigan, but is believed to have murdered at least 6 more people between 1992 and 1999. Armstrong joined the United States Navy in 1992. His rank mates have described him as moody. He allegedly killed his first victims in 1991, although this is not confirmed. Between 1993 and 1998, researchers believe Armstrong murdered 11 women, all of whom were prostitutes. He claims to have killed in Seattle, Washington, Hawaii, Hong Kong, China, North Carolina, Virginia, Thailand, and Singapore. He was honorably discharged from the Navy in 1999 and enrolled at Schoolcraft College in Livonia, Michigan afterwards. On January 2nd, 2000, Armstrong was questioned by police in Dearborn Heights, Michigan, after he reported finding a body in a river. He claimed he felt nauseated and attempted to vomit in the river when he discovered the body of Wendy Jordan, but he was not arrested at that time. He attempted to murder Wilma Drain on April 2nd, 2000 after she got into his Jeep, but she sprayed him with the mace and was able to flee. On April 7th, he offered Devon Marcus $40 for sex and attempted to strangle him, but Marcus was able to flee as well. Following his escape, Marcus contacted police and identified Armstrong as his captor. On April 10th, police found 3 bodies in a railway yard in southwest Detroit. All of the victims had been prostitutes who were strangled to death and left in sexually provocative positions. They were later identified as Robin Brown, Rosemarie Felt, and Kelly Jean Hood. On April 12th, police arrested Armstrong for the murder of Wendy Jordan after DNA evidence found with the body matched Armstrong's DNA. In March 2001, Armstrong was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Wendy Jordan and sentenced to life imprisonment. On June 18, 2001, he was additionally convicted of killing Kelly Jean Hood, Robin Brown, Rosemarie Felt, and Monica Johnson. He would later explain that the reason he had left Brown, Felt, and Hood in sexually provocative positions after he killed them was so he could always go back and have sex. He knew that they will always be there. What the hell? Shelly Andre Brooks, born January 22nd, 1969, is another American serial killer in the Michigan area, Detroit particularly, who murdered at least 7 women in Detroit from 2001 to 2006, though he's suspected of killing up to 20 women and possibly more. He was caught thanks to a survivor and fully admitted his guilt at his trials, for which he was given multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Brooks was born in Detroit but was raised in Ann Arbor, around 40-50 miles from Detroit. His father neglected him and he was 4. His mother left the family, leaving him in the hands of his grandparents. Brooks was reportedly to be angry at his mother throughout his childhood, though he never saw her again after she left the family. Throughout his early years, Brooks showed signs of low intelligence, and I have been around this prisoner before, and he is super off and super weird and super low intelligence. As victims, Brooks targeted middle-aged female prostitutes or homeless drug addicts. He committed his crimes around the city of Detroit, dumping their bodies in abandoned buildings and houses. He was able to easily win his victims' trust because of his own life on the streets. He started killing at age 32 in 2001, and throughout the next 5 years, he would kill at least 6 more women until 2006 at the age of 36. He is suspected of up to 20 plus murders from as early as 1999. Brooks would take his victims to abandoned buildings and houses where he sexually assaulted them and beat them to death with rocks. He left his victims' bodies in the same abandoned buildings he lured them into. His victims ranged from 30 to 54. On June 26, 2006, Brooks was arrested for sexually assaulting a woman. After his arrest, his DNA was transferred into a database in an effort to possibly connect him to any unsolved cold cases. Authorities had their first hit after they successfully linked him to the 2002 slaying of Pamela Greer. Thanks to further research, they exposed his involvement in the other murders. In 2007, he was found guilty and was sentenced to 2 terms of life imprisonment. He is currently in prison at the G. Robert Cotton Correctional Facility in Jackson, Michigan. Now finally, Don Gene Miller, born December 28, 1954, known as the East Lansing serial killer or simply Don Miller, is an American serial killer and rapist who committed a series of 6 attacks in East Lansing, Michigan from 1977 to 1978. 4 of these resulted in fatalities, to which Miller would later plead guilty and receive a lengthy prison sentence with a chance of parole. Now this guy might be getting out again. They gave him an extra 25 years because he got caught with a strangling device inside his room. Now I told y'all once before, this was my bunkie, but we parted ways because in the Michigan Department of Corrections, I don't do white bunkies unless they like hood or they gangbangers or they, you know, they relatable. So I had to get up out that room with him. Donald Green Miller was one of 3 children of Gene and Elaine Miller. His parents, who lived in a middle-class neighborhood of East Lansing, were considered upstanding and law-abiding citizens who took good care of their son. Throughout the early 1970s, he attended East Lansing High School, where he was regarded as a good student who played the trombone in the school's marching band, was a youth minister at his church, and was considered popular. During this period, he met a girl named Martha Sue Young, who would later become his girlfriend. After graduating from high school in 1973, Miller enrolled at the Michigan State University, where he studied criminal law. He continued his intimate relationship with Young, and in his spare time, worked part-time as a construction worker. In late 1976, Miller proposed to Young, which she accepted. However, in December, she broke off her relationship with him and refused to marry him. 3 days later, she met with Miller on New Year's Eve. During the early hours of the morning, he assaulted and strangled her. After Young did not return home, her parents contacted the police, who began an investigation. They eventually located witnesses who claimed that Miller was the last person to see her alive, whereupon he was detained for interrogation. During the procedure, Miller admitted that he had indeed spent the night with her, but insisted that they drove her to her doorstep around 2 a.m. before he headed back home. Since Young's body had not been found at the time and there was no evidence to implicate him in a crime, the authorities released him. On October 20th, 1977, 2 hunters found Young's clothes and purse near a lake in Bath. The girl's underwear was found neatly folded underneath her clothes, leading police to believe that her killer had posed the body and clothes after the murder. And if you've been listening to what I've been dropping, why do they always pose the victims? Like, that's crazy. On June 15, 1978, Miller attacked 27-year-old Marita Choquette, an assistant editor at WKAR TV, whom he stabbed 17 times. After killing her, he again posed her body and cut off her hands. He then transported the body to a property in Aldewan Township, where he covered it with cinder blocks. On June 27th, he killed his third victim, 21-year-old MSU student Wendy Bush. While investigating her disappearance, authorities found witnesses who claimed that they had last seen her on the campus with a young, tall, white man who was unknown to them. His fourth victim was 30-year-old school teacher Christine Gusky Stewart, whom he met on the street during a walk home from the campus auto shop on August 14th. During the attack, Miller strangled, then loaded her corpse into his car and drove outside of town where he dumped it. On August 16th, 1978, 2 days after Stewart's murder, Miller knocked on the door of a random house in Lansing, asking to use the phone. The door was answered by 14-year-old Lisa Gilbert, and upon realizing that she was home alone, he decided to attack her. After asking the girl for a pencil and paper to write down the number, he was allowed inside, whereupon he tied up, beat, raped, and assaulted her. In order to get rid of any eyewitnesses, Miller attempted to kill Lisa's 13-year-old brother, Randy, who had just returned home from a walk. However, Randy instead confronted the assailant and allowed his sister to flee outside, since she was only wearing nylon stockings tied around her wrist and her father's necktie, which Miller had used as a gag. Sick. Gilbert immediately attracted the attention of passers-by and motorists. In the meantime, Miller had managed to choke Randy into unconsciousness and stabbed him 3 times, but despite his extensive injuries and blood loss, he survived the ordeal. Following the attack, Miller attempted to drive away in his brown 1973 Oldsmobile Cutlass, but numerous witnesses managed to remember his license plate and appearance. After providing this information to police, it subsequently led to the arrest at his own apartment mere hours later, with Miller being charged with attempted murders. Now, the trial investigation. After his arrest, Miller was charged with the rape of Lisa Gilbert, as well as attempted murder of both her and her brother. A plethora of evidence linked him to the crime, including semen samples and fingerprints left on household objects and on the victims' bodies. But despite this, he refused to plead guilty. Miller claimed that he suffered from multiple personality disorders, and due to this, his attorneys filed a motion to have him undergo a psychiatric evaluation. The results of the examination concluded that he was sane, had a relatively high IQ, and even attempted to manipulate the psychiatrist during the procedures. The trial began in the spring of 1979 and lasted 2 weeks. A number of prosecution witnesses, including the victims, confidently identified Miller as the assailant when put on the stand. Based on various pieces of evidence and testimony, he was found guilty on all charges May 8, 1979, and sentenced to 50 years imprisonment with a chance of parole after serving 30 years. It's back when they had good time. At the time of the sentencing, Miller was still considered the prime suspect in his ex-fiancee's murder, and as he was the last person to see her alive, he eventually was charged with her murder. Although the prosecution case consisted of witness testimonies and highly circumstantial evidence, the likelihood of conviction was high, and if convicted, he would receive an additional sentence. On July 13th, with the assistance of his attorneys, Miller approached the Ingram County Prosecutor Office with a plea deal in exchange for dropping the first-degree murder charges and waiving the option of life imprisonment. He will plead guilty to 4 murders and reveal the locations of 3 remaining victims to police. His offer was accepted, and 3 days later, Miller was transported under escort to Bath, where he revealed that Young's body had been dumped in a Prigorous Park. Afterwards, he was transported to Olive Township, Clinton County, where he indicated that he had dumped Stewart's remains in a drainage ditch. A few days later, Miller led the police to remains of his last victim, Wendy Bush, which were found in a small patch of woods at the intersection of the roads near Delta Charter. I mean, I'm having a hard time even reading this. This dude is crazy. In subsequent interviews, Miller told investigators how events unfolded during each of the murders. He claimed that he strangled Young in the early hours of January 1st, 1977, in a fit of rage after she told him that she was no longer interested in him. He was also acquainted with Bush and had asked her out on several occasions, but when she repeatedly refused, he strangled her in the parking lot near Spartan Stadium. He also claimed to be on friendly terms with Chiquette, whom he had met while at MSU. Miller started that on the day of the murder, he had invited her over for breakfast and killed her immediately afterwards. He explained that he had tied her up and handcuffed her wrist, which he was later unable to open, forcing him to cut her hands off instead. In describing details of Stewart's murder, surprised law enforcement by claiming that he had not planned to kill her. According to his testimony, Stewart resembled Young, which made him believe that she was still alive. In apparent panic, he ran her over with his car. Upon examining the unconscious woman up close, Miller realized that she was not Young and attempted to help her up. However, as she was unconscious and bleeding profusely, he ultimately strangled her and loaded the corpse into his car, whereupon he drove to Clinton County and left in a drainage ditch. Man, I'm having trouble reading this, bro. This is sadistic. Based on the terms of the plea deal, the first-degree murder charges were dismissed. What? Miller was instead charged with several counts of involuntary manslaughter, to which he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment with a chance of parole after 10 years. The relatively lenient sentence and the plea deal itself caused outrage in the state and across the country, with victims' relatives criticizing prosecutors for accepting it. However, the Ingram County District Attorney Peter Hoke later said in a statement that he had no other choice since the bodies of the victims had not yet been identified or discovered, and with predominantly circumstantial evidence, the chance of a successful conviction was very slim. In the aftermath of his incarceration, Miller was interned at various facilities around the state, where he always was described as a model inmate who worked for the prison's newspaper. After serving 10 years in prison, Miller was allowed to apply for parole in 1989, but this was denied because of protests from his victims' families and due to the seriousness of his crimes. From then until 1997, he applied for parole 6 more times, but always was denied. In 1997, an organization named the Public Awareness and Protection Committee, spearheaded by Martha Young's mother, Sue, was created in order to uncover all the wrongdoings Miller had committed while in prison. The first discovery was that 3 years prior, during a search of Miller's cell at the Ken Ross Correctional Facility, jail guards discovered and confiscated a shoelace that could have been used as a murder weapon. Remember I told you this guy was a bunkie, and I think that case was BS, but he did have like little weird objects, and then we had to like split ways because I don't do the white bunkies and MDOC unless they hood or gangbangers or they relatable. I can't do no weird old white man. But upon discovering this, Sue Young contacted representatives of the Chippewa County Prosecutor's Office, who, after reviewing the investigation, filed charges against Miller for illegal possession of weaponry. Miller's attorneys, who had been hired by his parents, and his parents want this guy to get out, tried to convince the jury that there was no evidence that the shoelace could be used as a weapon, but Miller was nonetheless found guilty and sentenced to an additional 40 years imprisonment with a chance of parole after serving 20 years. Due to this, he would only be allowed to file another parole application in October 2018. In the early 2010s, after many prison facilities across the USA began experiencing problems with prison overcrowding, a series of judicial reforms were enhanced to reduce the number of prisoners. In 2015, the Supreme Court ruled that all prisoners eligible for parole could apply out of state when they have served 25 years and reached the age of 60. Because Miller fell into this category of prisoners, he filed an unscheduled parole application in 2016. In response, his victims' relatives and many members of the Ingram County Prosecutor's Office created a petition protesting his release and presented it to the Department of Corrections. After reviewing his case, the parole board denied Miller's application and barred him from filing any further claims until August 2021. Chris Goss, a spokesman for the Department of Corrections, said in a statement that the parole board was denied due to the fact Miller denied his guilt during the 1998 trial on the weapons charges. He also said that Miller had not participated in any sex offender rehabilitation programs over the years and had failed to convince the board members that he no longer posed a danger to society. In 2001, Miller applied for parole for the 9th time, but was again denied and barred from applying to the summer of 22 and early May 22. In 1967, early 22, the 67-year-old yet again applied for parole, but due to protests from victims' relatives and the severity of his actions, he was denied again. The next time he will be able to file another application is August 2027. If he serves out his full sentence, his projected release date will be 2031, will be putting him into his 70s. And if you know, like I know, if you spent all that time in prison, you can still harm people at 70s because you're still in pretty good shape. I think it's I think it's safe to say he don't need another chance. Tell me y'all thoughts, likes, comments. I make pennies off this, bro. So if y'all like this type of stuff, y'all into this true crime, like the way it was put out, the format, please, just press the like button. Leave a comment. I don't care if it's a period. I don't care what you comment, as long as you comment, man. It's free. Make sure y'all subscribe to my membership channel, too, if y'all want to support the page, man. Peace and blessings be upon y'all.